Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, May 18th, 2020. I think I got all of that right. It's still 2020. I don't know. We're losing track of days, losing track of years. Anything could happen at this point. It is Monday. I'm glad of that. Greg Dworkin should be back with us to check in over another crazy weekend. The tea still sitting nearby. The microphone might even get a chance to finish that while it's still warmish. That's good news. Lots happening, including the usual Monday rush of crazy stories that have nothing to do with anything but that distract my attention nonetheless. This is my decompression from the weekend. The weekends themselves don't give me much in the way of decompression anymore because, of course, Donald Trump's still president and we still have coronavirus out here, and so we're collecting all the stories about that. And I'm grateful for small distractions like, I don't know, I just saw this one here. I imagine this will be getting some traction. It looks pretty viral at this point. Do we know if it's real? I don't know. She says it's real. Bobby Heineman, I don't know how she pronounces the last name, Hineman. And, well, this is interesting. So she's tweeting out something a picture of a letter she got from her neighbor, apparently, and I just can't believe it's real. And I guess this would one day show up on one of those Reddit am I the asshole things or not, but I don't know. So far it's just live action right out here. I don't know. I can't tell. It's so extraordinary and so stupid sounding you can't believe it's really real, but I don't know. Well, here's my Monday distraction. She gets a letter that says, "Dear neighbor, you just moved into this neighborhood a year ago and I wanted to give you time to correct this problem on your own, but you're apparently too inconsiderate to do so." Is it about wearing face masks? Plenty of stories over the weekend about people who coughed on other people and got into fights. That's becoming a national pastime. But no, this is something else. Every day this week, when weather has been nice and windows are open, you proceed to let your small child run free in your backyard and laugh and giggle and carry on without end, which most people would think of as something soothing and fun, even if it is your neighbor. This is very disruptive, though, for my two dogs and my bird, who sits, the bird, that is, next to the window. I don't know what the dogs do, where they sit. So sits is proper there. The bird who sits next to the window, and they like to look into your yard, which really she should be charging money for, apparently. Anyway, perhaps you could ask him to tone it down a bit, or at least limit his outside time to 15 to 20 minutes a day, so my dogs can be outside without seeing him running around. If this kind of behavior persists, and then all caps, I will call the police. That seems like a fun neighbor. Well, the better comment actually is the follow-up from the first commenter who asks, any chance that letter was written by any of the dogs or the bird? Which is a better explanation than it actually coming from your neighbor. But hey, what can I tell you? So that's the world in which we live. I hope your weekend went better than that person's. And wow, I don't know. There's a lot to follow up on that I'll check in on. I had an interesting discussion this morning briefly over a New York Post article. This brings us at least back to sort of the usual subject at hand. New York Post, which is not really necessarily where you want to turn for news, but if you're looking for distraction from the news, fine. Running a new entry in a new genre of stories. The article about the person who thought coronavirus was a hoax, who then got coronavirus, and is writing about it. Now, the New York Post is the Murdoch, I think, the Murdoch-owned tabloid in New York. But they are based in New York, and they have a readership among people who would be offended by adopting what you would think would be the normal Rupert Murdoch approach to coronavirus, which is to say that it's a hoax or a Democratic plot of some kind. I believe Eric Trump spent the weekend saying that it was a Democratic plot to prevent his father from holding rallies. But, yeah, I'll put the rest of this story off until later on. I'm not going to read through the whole story. But basically a guy who got coronavirus, gave it to his wife. His wife's in a bad way. It sounds like he'll recover. She might not. But I don't know. My quick read of it was, don't worry. He still thinks he didn't do anything wrong, and he's pretty sure everybody forgives him. He has the magic of religion on his side, so he's pretty sure it's all going to be okay. She may die, but it's all going to be all right because something. Anyway, a lot left unsaid in that piece, but apparently he's got a longer Facebook post on it, which we might explore to see whether he at any point expresses anything about it, because he's got no, he doesn't make any mention in the piece in the New York Post about, also, maybe while I was walking around saying it was a hoax and not wearing a mask, I might have infected some other people, and I'm not sure if they forgive me. I'm pretty sure my wife does. She doesn't have anything to say in this piece. She's on a ventilator. She's not going to be saying anything to anybody. But he's pretty sure everybody forgives him, so that's cool. Let's see. We saw some other stories of people getting into fights over the weekend because some of the states have opened, some states have partially opened, and as expected, too many people took that to mean there's no restrictions anymore, let's do whatever we want. So we'll be dealing with that for a little while. Eric Trump's insistence that his father is being targeted by this Democratic hoax of the virus, and you should all ignore it. Meanwhile, of course, you would also have observed all the tyranny that these right-wingers were complaining of by looking at pictures of the beachfront at Myrtle Beach, or even here in Virginia Beach. Jam-packed beaches, most of which were still closed. I don't know how Myrtle Beach, what their situation is, but Virginia Beach was officially closed, and yet jam-packed with people risking it all. And, it may turn out that the beach is a fine place to be. And to be honest, for Virginia Beach, they weren't quite as packed together as I've seen them. So it might be all right, and it might be that perspective doesn't quite show if they're 6 feet apart or not. But it's a pretty windy place to be, very sunny. It might actually turn out to be nice. But, of course, I did see Garance Frank Ruda making the excellent point yesterday. If we had contact tracing in place, you would be able to tell whether or not being outdoors in the sun and the wind at the beach is actually a safe way to get outdoor time without transmitting the virus. But since no one wants to, check that out, or as the Republicans now say, contact tracing is a Democratic hoax as well, we'll never find out. And even I think even over in Amity Island, the mayor and establishment would have recognized the wisdom of that, but apparently not here in America. Okay, I'll tell you who is here in America. It's Greg Dworkin, and he'd like to get a chance to speak and use his freedom of speech. How about it now, then, Greg? How are you?
Oh, what about now?
Now would be good. Do you want to go?
Or how about now?
Hold on.
This is a Monday morning, so
now.
I got a little bit of a slow start here, but I have stuff to talk about. Here's my question for you. You want to do politics? You want to do the pandemic?
Yes, please. Well, let's do the pandemic first. We're on. I've heard people have heard about this thing, and I'd like to talk
it's
to
a
them
thing.
about it.
So there's lots and lots of death, unfortunately. 3,400 people in Connecticut have died in the pandemic, and we're approaching 90,000 now for the United States.
No, we're past that.
And people, keep saying, well, we're well past 100 if you count the excess deaths.
Yes.
But we're going to be at 100 officially fairly soon.
This week.
And I see that people posting about, folks are getting tired of this story, aren't they? Or this or that, and it's too big a number and people can't comprehend it and wrap their heads around it. That's true. But that's not how people take this stuff in. The 3,500 in Connecticut means that there are people in this town, Newtown, who I know have gotten the virus, who have gotten Rona, who have died from it. Mm-hmm. And so as you begin to know people, it remains personal, and the 90,000 isn't how you think about it. You think about the 11 or 15 people who have had it, most of whom have recovered, some of whom haven't.
Yeah.
And that's the way it strikes. And again, there's polling suggesting in the rural areas, as many as 25% of folks know somebody with the virus. And in the urban areas, like New York, it approaches 50%. So the idea that the number is too big to comprehend, that's not how people take it in. So I'm not buying that one at all. Now, there's still a lot of question about what to do. We're slowly opening up carefully. And, in fits and starts, some of them are bad fits and starts, like trying to intimidate the Michigan legislature with the gun nuts.
Yes.
And at the same time, there are states that are trying to do it responsibly, like New York and Rhode Island and California. And there are states that are just opening it up and throwing it open, like, Georgia, for example.
Yeah.
I got one example of that recently. And, the question on the table is what happens next. It's clear, and it was always clear from the beginning, that the purpose of lockdown isn't to stay locked down. It's to buy time to do stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of that time was wasted, and we haven't done stuff, so what do we do now? And that's why you're seeing the fits and starts of opening things up. And that big picture really can't be forgotten when you're trying to assess what's going on here. Now, there's places like Georgia that still, even when you start to open up, don't open up fully.
Yeah. The
public isn't into it. They're not ready for it. In fact, polling even today suggests that something like 70% of the population are still going to call for lockdowns and social distancing should the virus come back in a bigger way, or if it ever hits the way New York does.
Yeah.
So the idea that, okay, it's done, as the Trump administration is trying to push, just isn't where the public is at, which is why they're losing on this.
Okay,
but that's the politics. We'll get to that. In terms of the pandemic and what you're supposed to do, it's really not clear what we're supposed to do. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that the CDC is invisible. And so they're not giving the guidance one would normally go to and say, okay, well, here's how we do this. Here's their cookbook. Here's the piece of paper. Here's the, care plan that we're out here doing. Because that, you have to use stolen CDC leaked guidance to really get an idea of what to do, which is absurd.
Yeah, we've been passing
and
that
some
around.
states are better at it than others.
It's been pretty interesting talking to people who are responsible for reopening various institutions, and they have all they have is sort of leaked CDC information. They got state information, but people are using it anyway, passing it around and saying this isn't.
Now the states are talking to
official.
CDC behind the scenes, but it's just so invisible.
Yeah.
It's really hard for individuals or groups like hairdressers or gyms to really know exactly what they do, or schools. What's the guidance for schools?
Yeah. Well, right. They're making theirs up as they go along. I think their approach to it is, well, we're closed, so we're talking about September, so we have some time to talk.
Now, the worst of it happens when, like in Milwaukee or Wisconsin in general, the state Supreme Court throws out the rules and then people just crowd into bars.
Yeah.
Or this piece from the Washington Post that I just sent over to you from Georgia. This feels great. A preview from Georgia about how America might reemerge from the coronavirus, eating, drinking, touching, and throwing caution to the wind. Now, that would be a horrible mistake.
Oh no. Yeah, it would be. They're doing it. It is one.
Right. It's that's happening at the same time. And what kind of models do we have in terms of how well this is going to work? Part of the problem is that when you do something like this, it takes 2 or 3 weeks to really see the effect. If you don't have good reporting and proper monitoring of numbers, you don't really know. I mean, there's all these stories about Georgia opened up and the next day the cases rose, or the same thing in Texas. Well, we don't really know that. What happened is that the day after they decided to open, they started reporting some old data, and so the cases jumped, but you got to wait 2 or 3 weeks to see if the cases really jump. And you have to properly report. You have to go to the nursing homes and the meatpacking plants if you have them in your state, and measure them properly and report them properly, not try to hide the deaths. You have to look at excess deaths to get a sense of what's really going on with the pandemic, and all that stuff takes time. So when you reopen, you get this feel-good surge, but you don't really know what kind of mistake you made until later.
No. And I did see even the report. I mean, it depends what you mean by reporting. Because some of the reporting.
Well, Florida says that the
Yeah.
death rate is X,
Yes.
and the testing
Well,
rate
you say
is
that.
Y. In Florida, specifically, they don't report private testing unless those private labs choose on their own to report to the state government.
Okay.
And there's been plenty of stories in the Miami Herald and others about misrepresenting senior deaths because they're just not reporting properly.
Yeah. And when I'm speaking of reporting,
That's what I'm talking about.
yeah, right. Well, that's the real reporting. The fake reporting that we get from reporters, which is to say, I talked to some people who did the reporting, and now I'm reporting it. That's not a bad vocation. I do it, but yeah, I just happened to notice yesterday. For instance, you mentioned Texas, and I think Texas. When are they saying they even reopened? I'm not even sure when Texas would put their reopening date. But one of the interesting comparisons I saw, somebody tweeting these two photo screen grabs or side by side of ABC TV's Houston affiliate, Channel 13, tweeting out, "No sign of COVID-19 spike since Texas reopened. Hospitalization numbers remain flat," and it's illustrated with a picture of people out at the beach in Texas, but it's side by side with a picture of a barber shop reopened and everybody wearing masks inside. Very good. From ABC News National, reporting new, Texas has seen a steady rise in novel coronavirus cases and fatalities since reopening just over 2 weeks ago. And
Right.
if you've had
And yet,
your
at
2
the same
weeks-
time, since reopening 2 weeks ago, they're doing more testing.
Yeah.
So, it's really hard to put it all together in terms of what it means. It's true that if you test more, you're going to find more, but that in and of itself is
Trump says.
telling you that there are cases there.
Yeah.
So you can't just blow it off and say, oh, well,
Well, like
all
the
those extra
president
deaths
did.
are because we're counting them.
Yes. I
Well,
mean,
actually, the story is all those extra deaths,
yes. That
not
was the
excuses
president's
for
line
why you're finding them.
last week, right? If you test, then you find out. You can't do that. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly right. So,
he's really
people
good at
still struggle
science.
with this because
Doctors
it's such a
wanna
big
know why.
story, and you get all this pushback from the government. No, we're doing it right. No, it's not nearly as bad as you said it was going. You said everybody was going to be wiped out tomorrow, and that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So you're exaggerating, and we don't have to listen to anything else you say.
I guess so. Yeah,
You
I'm
called it
still
a magazine.
astonished about this. I mean, I guess the fact that you can die from it has almost done a disservice to us. Is people say, well, look, a 99% chance you won't die is what they say. Then they say that translates to you'll be fine. Nah, you may miss 3 weeks of work. You'll be sick. It'll be terrible.
Meanwhile, we still haven't gotten our minds around and our heads wrapped around the unemployment stuff that comes from this.
Right. And
that is still to
from
come
that.
as well. And, there's a lot of interesting stories coming out about how a lot of the hidden cost here is unemployment in the over 65s. You get laid off, you're not coming
You're not
back.
supposed to. Yeah, well, you're supposed
Well,
to.
maybe
be
you're
retired.
counting on that money. Maybe you still want to
Yeah.
work.
And you want your freedoms.
Well, maybe that's one of the reasons why the older 65s are starting to drift away from Trump.
Yeah, that could
because
be.
he's not only trying to kill him, but he's also trying to lay him off.
Two things that are very unpopular with most people you talk to.
Right. So, again, that's something to keep in mind. Now, I want
Death and
to give you
unemployment.
this really interesting short,
Taxes.
I have a long one, but this is
Yeah.
a short one,
Oh, I'll take
short
that.
tweet storm
Yes.
by Nick Christakis over at Yale, which I think was pretty fascinating and worth putting into the conversation. And it's about Sweden. And if you're going to talk about how it's okay to lighten up, a lot of people will say, see, look at Sweden. Sweden's doing
Yes.
okay. And
Right. Remember when they hated
Sweden's
Sweden?
not doing okay, actually.
Yeah.
That's really the point.
How they doing in
Nicholas
Malmo?
writes, there's been a lot of discussion on the Swedish approach to coping with the what he calls the COVID-19 pandemic. I tend to use coronavirus, as most people do, and of whether their strategy of more voluntary restrictions and a more rapid approach to reaching herd immunity would work. Let's talk about the results so far. It's been known for some time that the coronavirus death rate in Sweden was 3 to 7 times that of its similar Nordic neighbors, even if Sweden was doing better than many other countries with more severe restrictions like the U.S.
Okay.
Sweden, well, everybody's doing better than the U.S.
Yeah, right. That's hard not to do.
Sweden
Possible.
banned gatherings of greater than 50 people. Schools for kids under 16 are open. Older pupils tele-learn from home, which is an interesting approach.
Yeah.
You've probably seen on the news all week they've been talking about this multi-organ inflammatory syndrome in children, trying to make the point that kids aren't immune to this.
Yeah.
Bars, restaurants, and gyms are open with physical distancing rules. People are asked to work from home if possible. Elderly were told to stay home.
Yeah, that's not exactly wide open.
Exactly. So when people say, well, Sweden's wide open, why can't we? Sweden's actually doing something similar than what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And so they're a good look at, well, what happened. Swedes themselves have mostly acted sensibly. Use of public transport's fallen significantly. A third of people say they avoid going to the workplace. Daily restaurant turnover fell by 70% in the month through April 22nd, but good behavior is hardly uniform. Sounds like us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sweden chose the path in some sense with reason, because without a vaccine or total hermetic isolation of the population, there's no way to avoid a plague. Plus, full lockdown is stopgap to flatten the curve. Some set of procedures must eventually replace it. And again, remember, flattening the curve means saving the hospital system. I think we've done that. That we succeeded.
I know,
barely.
but everybody loved the phrase so much.
It's still under stress, and it's still under stress in the rural areas.
Yes.
And it's also under financial stress, because when you turn off the elective surgery, you turn off the money spigot for the hospitals, which they use to help treat everybody else.
Yeah.
Whether you decide it's a good system or a bad system, I'm just saying for the purposes of this conversation, that's the system. So when you turn off the money, then the hospitals start having real money issues. Plus, full lockdown is a stopgap measure to flatten the curve. Some set of procedures must eventually replace it. But could the Swedes somehow miraculously thread the needle and protect their vulnerable members while also allowing the pathogen to spread relatively unchecked in its population, building collective immunity without letting people die?
No.
The answer is no.
Okay.
Doesn't work that way.
All right.
This paper, and then he cites a preprint, so it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet, quantifies excess deaths in Sweden week by week, starting in week 10 in early March for men and women at all ages. The excess deaths, especially for men, became apparent by week 15 and are especially pronounced for older ages. Excess deaths among all adults and both sexes increase as the pandemic progresses across time in 2020. Along with Italy, Spain, France, Belgium, and the UK, Sweden has the highest rate of excess deaths in Europe at this time.
Wow.
So, it's working. Working in the sense that people can go to restaurants if they want to, but it's not working in the sense that people are dying at excess rate. So what is your endpoint in terms of what you consider working?
Yeah.
We have this discussion all the time in politics. Trump said something and it just might work. What does that mean? If he loses the election, how did it work?
Yeah.
Well, I saw it on Fox News, so that's my definition of working. See, it made it onto the news. Well, that's true and a terrible way to measure working or not. MSNBC covered it for an hour, and they never mentioned it again, and then they went on to talk about other things. So, what's your measure? What's your endpoint?
What is it?
And how is it relevant? So if you're talking about that Swedish society hasn't drastically changed, but at the same time, their excess deaths are as bad as Italy and Spain, how is that a win?
I don't know. And can I safely go to IKEA? Is my question.
The overall magnitude of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on human survival is mind-boggling. In rich, healthy, functional Sweden, it's already shaved 3 years of life expectancy for men and 2 years for women. And it also highlights the astonishing gender disparity. Now, the decline in life expectancy is assuming the pathogen stays there, as opposed to come and going.
Okay.
But, he's trying to make the point that Sweden didn't escape unscathed. And then there's this interesting piece in the Boston Review from an Italian living in Sweden about the social aspects of that, which I think are just fascinating and worth spending a little time on. It's not that long. As an Italian living in Sweden, I become accustomed to surprised by the many ways that Sweden is different, not just from Italy, but from its own reputation as an exceptionally virtuous country and model society. The double estrangement is especially dismaying during the public health crisis. By letting the citizens live their lives mostly as usual, the Swedish government's soft, non-interventional approach to the pandemic has challenged the paths undertaken by other countries. Sweden's decided to go lagom, a Swedish word that just means just right, neither too much nor too little. So they've gone Goldilocks.
Swedish Goldilocks. And there's a lot of Goldilockses in Sweden.
Exactly right. Few restrictions have been imposed. People are mostly asked to keep clean and physically distant. Sweden also has decided not to track the disease's spread, and their testing lags far behind other countries. Now, that may be a realistic choice in anticipation of a lockdown that would be unsustainable for people and for the economy, but it feels odd. The right response to the pandemic has been elusive, and that's true here and everywhere. But different local approaches do say something about our conceptions of politics and society, about our ideas of life and attachments, and the links between private values and public choices. Despite the disagreement among analysts and foreign media on its appropriateness, they explain Sweden's soft way of managing coronavirus as a reflection of Nordic individualism, trust in institutions and in fellow citizens.
Trust in institutions and individualism.
Right. People will do the right thing out of sense of responsibility, it's thought, yet crowded streets and bustling play parks may tell a different story.
Dope.
Now, in Sweden these days, high schools are closed, university classes have moved online, university canteens are open. Remember the old canteen? I mean, it's like not just a metal container you can drink from. It's actually where you sell stuff. People are encouraged to work from home, and a ban on meetings of 500 people, later reduced to 50, was introduced in March. But elementary schools remain open and compulsory. And there's no restriction on supermarkets, shopping malls, indoor amusement parks, or public transport and trains. I see no change when looking at crowded restaurants and cafes. It's spring, and the warmth and light make people here come back to life after the long winter. Neighbors in the countryside invited 3 different families to stay over for Easter weekend, and they all happily shared meals.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure
More
they
on
were
this
happy to
after the break.
Yeah. There's been a lot of interesting perspective from, interestingly, we read something on Friday. Italians all over Scandinavia working and living there. That's the European Union for you. And they have thoughts about this, having seen what happened in the home country. Yeah. All right. We'll be right back to express yet more of them. Wonderful writing as well. Good job, Italy. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Welcome back to Sweden. Yeah, for sure. To Sweden. And Lederhosen, etc. Not really from Sweden, but okay. Let's continue. Greg was informing us what we chatted over the break about how interesting it is to hear from this Italian living in Sweden, writing in English, for all of us to ignore as
because American exceptionalism, because we're so good at everything, including languages.
All right. Well, it's fantastic English prose, so let's continue.
So the reason I want to highlight this is because it really gets to what's going on here. Is the proclaimed belief in the Swedish character, she writes, an individual responsibility at the heart of the country's response to coronavirus? As an observer, that's not what I see.
Oh dear.
Rather, it seems the mark of an organicist society, one in which individual freedom always gives way to public good, where individuals' goals and expectations are shaped by the will of the government. Indeed, the secret of Sweden's exceptionalism rests in a social compact that limits and not expands people's reliance on each other, because it fosters dependence on the state. In Sweden, government action against coronavirus is relaxed and contradictory, and so are people's responses. Now, that's just like here. And that's why I think it's so interesting.
Okay.
At the root of the synergy is a unique pact between state and citizens. The state provides for people's material needs so they will not have to depend on each other for their welfare or be exposed to chance. In exchange, citizens trust the state to make decisions in their interest. Trust or the confidence that a party will act fairly and in the interest of the other party is an essential element here. When there's trust, people don't need to act defensively or attack out of fear of being attacked. It's the absence of complete information. In the absence of complete information, she meant to say, trust supports stability and reduces uncertainty. Now, that's the exact opposite of what we see here. And that's why the Swedish approach cannot work in the United States.
Yeah.
There is no trust.
Okay.
Okay, and Republicans have gone out of their way. I'm not saying that state is all is the proper way to be. I am saying that Republicans have done everything possible to make government is the problem, not the solution. So it's a different society, and it wouldn't work here. Trust maintains an element of conditionality, she says. Trust is gained, but it's also tested and revoked if not honored. For trust in government to be a good thing, citizens need to keep doubting, examining, questioning, judging. In an organicist society, tests on trust cease. And with blind trust in government, people are relieved for the responsibility for what happens around them, even to them. For over a century, the Swedish state is committed to taking care of the children, the sick, and the old, but the bargain's dangerous for its citizens because taking responsibility, listening to one's own needs, and taking care of others is what makes us human and protects us from arbitrary power. So the idea that the state runs everything is at risk. And by accepting the compact, later on down to the end here, citizens agree to embrace the majority view and stand behind government decisions. And the state, committing to take care of its citizens, releases them from the burden of moral choices. That suspends your capacity to choose, and if practice makes perfect, individual agency and moral literacy, as well as untold numbers of lives, are at risk. So let's say you have a restaurant, a volunteer service that you think is important, teaching, whatever it is, and you're over 65. That individual agency is, okay, I'm over 65. Do I risk going out? Am I going to wear a mask? Will I come to this volunteer thing, which I think is important but not essential? It's up to me to decide whether I go or not. Rather than, okay, it's being decided for you because we're shutting it down or we're opening it up and telling everybody to come. So that individual agency is certainly at play. Do I go to the beach? Do I not go to the beach? How many people are going to be around me? Where do I put my blanket? Do I move if too many people are around me? What if they're singing? Singing spreads virus. What if it's a cloudy day? All these sort of things that individuals make are being made for them, in a strict circumstance, and the U.S. model is not to be that strict. So, Florida will open its beaches, and California will close them, and so individual states will take individual approaches, and maybe that makes sense because in the end, we're certainly seeing regional disparities in terms of what's going on with the virus. The problem is we're all doing it blind. We don't have testing. We don't know. We're still not sure of the science, and so we do it anyway. And, nobody's collecting the information in a coherent way that, like, everybody does it the same way. Again, that's where the lack of CDC input comes in. Florida collects it this way, but Texas collects it that way, and New York collects it yet another way. New York is talking about excess deaths. Florida's not telling you what's going on in the nursing homes. So it's very difficult to compare and say, okay, this worked here and that didn't work there. And that's part of the big frustration with all of this. So that proper balance, Sweden hasn't reached it either, because of the excess deaths that they're seeing. The U.S. hasn't done it. It's not that New York did it better than California or vice versa. Obviously, California had much less spike compared to New York. But if you look at the timelines, except for like a few days, New York and California were doing similar things at a similar time. Maybe New York had the subway and California didn't. It's not that California doesn't have public transport, but they're not packed in the way they are in New York. And maybe there's other factors like different strains of the virus that we don't know about yet.
True also, possibly.
But, we just don't know. And in that absence of knowing, it's really hard to say definitively, this is what you must do.
Yes.
And in the absence of that, the pressure to just do nothing or do something that benefits me personally, becomes overwhelming. Now, if you have a situation where the wealthier among us are somewhat insulated and at the same time demanding that the waitresses come back because I want to be served, That's different than the person who owns their own small business and feels like I'm going out of business unless I can get back and start seeing customers.
Right.
So it's not,
group,
one size fits all. It's really a complicated situation because people are complicated.
Yes.
And again, what we need is somebody to help start it. This is what we know. The old Tony Fauci line that he taught to me years ago. I don't know what the right thing is, but here's what we do know is the way you're supposed to approach this. And so take that which you know and put it into place. And that's why collecting the data is so important. That's why CDC and NIH are so important. And that's why it's so important for the states to listen to their own public health departments in regard to whether you open or not. And again, my worry is that that's not happening in Republican states, and it is happening in Democratic states. And it's going to take another month before we really see what's going on. So don't jump to conclusions about how it's working or not working yet. That would be a bad thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's the Sweden study is fascinating to see in parallel to what we're doing here. Yeah, it's been real interesting watching people react to it, and I like the way they recount what's happening in Sweden, and you can see instantly the differences, the similarities being the way we're approaching, lockdown, and the differences in I'm so envious reading about, well, people mostly trust one another and are nice to one another after having read the Weekend, and mostly that's still true here, but what stories make the news is the ones of people who fight in line at Red Lobster or punch one another in the Home Depot because they're
but at the same time, the United States is all these mask-making volunteers who are making masks for everybody, and including the healthcare workers, and
and the 80% polls.
I don't know if you saw in Belgium. The prime minister went to visit a hospital, and the hospital workers lined the street to greet him. And as he came in, or as she came in, I don't know who the prime minister is.
I'll ask Belgium.
People turned their back.
Yeah, that was remarkable. And I knew what you were talking about because you said, did you see what happened in Belgium? Only one thing happened in Belgium.
Only one thing happened in Belgium that would get our attention, and that was that.
Yeah, right. They stopped making the chocolate.
I think
WHO started doing
Belgium,
this.
But,
I did. I saw that. I knew exactly what you were going at.
And the reason for that is the prime minister had suggested a medical draft.
Oh.
Everybody should be drafted and thrown in, even if you're retired.
I see.
And they didn't ask the medical people whether that was a good idea. It was just proposed. That was the reason for the back turning.
Okay. Well, I mean, depending on, I guess, how you throw that out there, I could see what you're talking about. But
you guys are all heroes now. Go in there and heroize and save me.
Well,
I'm closing the door. You go out there.
Yeah, you could do that more sensitively than others. It might not come to mind exactly. It's a stressful time. But okay, so nobody got hurt. Backs were turned. They'll talk. That's Belgium.
So meanwhile, while that's happening, the other international piece I think is worth noting. My Republican friend Evan Siegfried tweets this: as the second wave begins in China's northeast, over 100 million are placed on strict lockdown again.
100 million.
So again, the idea that it just goes away and now you're fine.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to be happening, does it? Right, and people are forgetting. Who could blame you for trying to forget?
Who?
That right. Who exactly? They could forgive you for trying to forget that it's unlikely to be one of those things that you get a vaccination A, quickly, or B, ever, and 2, that it's here you go, you got your shot. That's it. I mean, even with things you get immunized for life with, it's a course of very often 2, 3 vaccinations. We're going to have 300 million people who may need 3 shots for this thing if they get one.
Right. Now, there is some good news on the vaccine front. There's a piece circulating around this morning that one of the vaccine candidates, prototypes, does appear to make an antibody response in humans.
That's what we're looking for.
All 45 of them.
All 45 humans
that were tested.
We tried it on? Okay. Well,
which is not the same thing as therefore showing it works, it's effective, it's safe, and then scaling it up so everybody can have one. So still the idea we're going to have one by November is no. Not
yeah,
happy.
no, that was nuts. I don't
But
know.
that's still
just
out there, so
Trump
that's some
saying.
good news. I like
Yeah.
looking at good news instead of
45
bad news.
people.
But the virus is not going away, and so I think now we have to turn to the politics and see how that's playing.
All right.
So Harry Anton has this
That's what we're
piece
here for.
updated 6 a.m. Monday, May 18th. That would be today,
on
entitled
it.
State Polls Suggest Biden Has a Clear National Lead. And I think that that's really what we need to talk about. Again, it's a reminder, folks, this is not 2016. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Poll of the week,
Okay.
a New Marquette Law School poll finds former Vice President Joe Biden with a 46-43 lead over President Donald Trump in Wisconsin. That poll matches the last poll from Marquette, which also had Biden up by 3 points. What's the point, Harry says? One of the big questions when we look at national polls is whether or not they're an accurate representation of what's going on at the state level. And that's a debate we often have. Yes, well, don't tell me about the national polls.
Right.
I only care about the battleground states. Well, here's what's going on in battleground. Don't tell me about the battleground states. I only care about the individual states. Well, here's the individual state. Well, don't tell me about the individual state. This isn't predictive.
How's the crucial county? Yes.
Fine.
All right.
Fine. Okay, fine. But one of the easiest ways to check is to compare state poll results to the past presidential vote in a given state. I did so for all telephone polls that called
Now
cell
that's
phones
way
since the
away.
beginning of April. So now we're talking about the Trump favoring, because the online polls favor Biden, the Trump favoring cell phones since the beginning of April. When we average out the state polls, they suggest Biden's running about 6 points ahead of Hillary Clinton's final margin. In other words, a state-level poll suggests Biden has a national lead of around 8 points.
Okay.
If you look at state level.
All
And you
right.
extrapolate.
That's
That's
what we're
actually a
supposed
little
to do,
greater
right?
than the 6.6 points Biden has in the high-quality national polling average taken during the same period. And I should note that if we weight the average of state polls to each state's population, we get a margin just north of 6.6. Weighting by population leaves us somewhat more susceptible to outliers because we have fewer polls from the most populated states. Either way, all methods agree Biden has a fairly sizable national advantage. And then he goes to the technical parts about why. So, the idea that state and national polls aren't related in some fashion has always been kind of silly. If you have a big national lead, you're going to be leading at state level. If you have state leads, you're going to be leading at national level. It works both ways.
I see.
If it's close, if you have a 2 or 3 point national lead, you don't know what's going on. And that's where the so-called electoral college advantage to Trump really comes in.
I can
Not
see
true once you get to be more than 5 or 6 points in the lead. And what's interesting, of course, is that if you look at average polling throughout this period for the last 6 months, let's say from 2016 versus now, and we've talked about this on the show, the 2016 is volatile, bouncing back and forth, and the 2020 stuff is incredibly stable, with Biden maintaining that 6 point lead for months and months and months and months and months.
We ought to
So the
cling to
bottom line is he's
stability.
winning right now.
Okay. The instinct ordinarily would be to cling to stability with all your might, but I guess we're gun shy on this.
We are. So, that's where things stand in terms of the politics. Then we have things thrown in there that, also add to the mix. For example, we have the MSN online poll. Remember, it's a favorable to Biden kind of poll, but that lead for Biden
1
has
million
just been
points.
widening and widening as we go on. Right now, it's approved 37, disapproved 60 for Trump in regard to his how is he
60.
doing as president.
Yeah.
And that started to get bad around the beginning of May, and things haven't changed. We won't have Navigator polling today because it's Monday. They don't publish on Sunday and Monday, so we'll have to wait for tomorrow on that. But their last one
Very lackadaisical.
had Trump's lowest level yet in their polling. The stuff that they released over the weekend had Trump approval 41 and disapprove 57. That's not all that different, 41-57, compared to what that MSN polling is showing. And I think we have a 9-point approval-disapproval gap for Trump in the civics polling that the Daily Kos does. So for all of that, the pandemic has really eaten into Trump's support. And if you open up and then things go sour, you wouldn't expect that to change. If you open up and things don't go sour, you wouldn't expect that to change because things don't change that much with Trump. What does happen, though, is that people get more and more convinced that Trump did a bad job. One of the ways we know that, again, is following the Navigator polling and they've done their tracking poll, and they include word clouds. And the word clouds change over time, although injection is still in there. But economy and opening up, in terms of negative things said about Trump, are still there. People are still afraid, and that's why the newer Washington Post polling shows that 70% of the public is still very wary of the idea that you just open up and people show. That's not how it's going to wind up working.
Yeah, probably not. Okay.
Right. Now, there's one thing I want to spend a little time on today, and that is this thread by Ethan Gray about racism. I just say it's 100 tweets long.
That's long. But it's on
and
what?
I'm not going to do all of them, but I think there's some important points here.
What are we talking about?
Summarize fairly quickly. So, Ethan Gray, and do you want to read it in collected form or twit form?
I
have both. I made a thread out of it.
Maybe at 100, maybe the collected form is better. I don't get interrupted with other comments. What? Okay, I see it here in your roundup.
So let me give you the thread version.
Okay.
Here it is. Okay. In this thread, I'll be delving into the psychology of white supremacy to answer the question of why Donald Trump's base has stuck with him.
No wonder it's 100. Okay.
But also why it's interesting.
Yes.
Now, you may know what white supremacy is ideologically, but you may not see how it could come to be viewed as the most important thing. That is because I still see people lament that Trump's base is still rallied around him despite botching our initial response to a viral pandemic.
Yes.
I believe this is ultimately rooted in a lingering refusal to completely accept why Donald Trump is president.
I refuse.
Not the thread I originally intended to compose. I was going to compose a thread that was meant to be an overview of the latest research regarding right-wing authoritarianism. And the purpose of this thread is entirely different. It's to supply well-intentioned white people with the information required to understand the psychology of racism and to frame that information in helpful ways. I hope it's successful. So let's lay out some first principles. We care about how we're doing relative to others, right?
Yes.
Like Sweden, Like it or not, doing well relative to others tends to have a positive effect on our well-being, whereas doing poorly relative to others has a negative effect. But we also have the unique capacity to care about how we're doing relative to others more than how we're doing in absolute terms. Okay?
Yes.
I've shown you my favorite example of this, an old study that looked at whether people want to make $50,000 or everybody else makes $25,000, or $100,000 or everybody else makes $200,000.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Now, 100 gives you more
principles there. Okay.
than
yes.
50. But relative to everybody else, you're getting less. So
Yes.
50%
Well,
opted for one and 50% opted for the other.
Yeah. Well, how many
pretty
of them are
interesting.
economists? Yeah, that is interesting. I mean,
Right? The purchasing power of money is the same in both scenarios. You can buy more things if you opted for scenario B.
Can you?
But people are willing to forego that over positional concerns. Being at the top of an established hierarchy is what is paramount.
Okay, I can believe that.
Right? That said, people don't just evaluate their social status based on how they're doing relative to others. They evaluate as individuals. They evaluate their social status based on how the group in which they identify are doing relative to other groups of people as well. Right? I mean, listen, it's fun watching the Yankees beat the Red Sox, but it's even more fun being a Yankees fan, watching other Yankees fans react to how it is when the Red Sox lose. That's why we all run to the Boston Globe to read the story the next day, not the New York Times.
I did not realize that was a phenomenon.
Oh, yeah. You read the New York Times when your team lost. You read the Boston Globe when your team won.
Okay.
Because it's really fun to see how they react. I mean, so this is known. It's a known thing. I'm just trying to put it in perspective people can understand. There's a byproduct of human nature. We have an individual and collective sense of identity. We do not just conceive of ourselves as individuals. We conceive of ourselves as belonging to a certain group. Okay? So this is a seminal paper citing Herbert Blumer from University of California. Race prejudice is a sense of group position. And the author composed this paper because prior to the conceptualization of race prejudice, people were conceptualizing race prejudice as the result of a set of specific feelings within an individual. And the author's intent was to demonstrate the formation of race prejudice is a collective process that arises from a sense of group.
Okay. Like dogs, for instance. Yes.
Brings me to the next major point. racism is inherently a group positional concern.
Yeah, I'm starting to become racist against dogs.
You can set your clock by 9:50 for when Abby barks. This
fine.
is why it's reductive to think of racism as hating or fearing another race. Not enough to mention, it's a set of feelings that arises specifically from a feeling of superiority of one group relative to another. Okay?
All right.
So the 4 requisites for the formation of race prejudice: you have to feel superior, a feeling that subordinate race is intrinsically different and alien, a feeling of proprietary claim to certain areas of privilege,
Oh, yes.
a fear and suspicion that the subordinate race harbors designs on the prerogatives of the dominant race.
I would.
Okay? And this fixation on relative position between racial groups is what I think a lot of white people miss when they think about racism. As the author notes, it can't be reduced to any individual negative emotion. So a lot of disbelief by white people who wonder why Trump's base hasn't turned on him is rooted in a refusal to see how white supremacy can appeal to white people. That an awareness of being in the dominant race, racial group, can provide affirmation. And because a white person's afraid of feeling guilty for contemplating why white supremacy may have appeal, or they fear seeing this appeal in white people within their social circles, and they may have to confront the nature of its appeal, it's difficult. So otherwise, well-intentioned white people tend to construe racists as arriving at this state of mind solely due to negative life experience. Something must have happened. And they're not seeing how what they're really, to summarize the other 75 tweets here, you have to give up something if you're going to confront, for example, economic inequality.
Likely true.
Right? Because if you're on the side that is the dominant economic status, you have to give something up in order to equalize it.
Yes.
And for white supremacy, if you are the dominant, I accept this privilege as my normal way of life, make American great again, because that's, somehow or other diminishing, I have to give something up in order to bring this back to a more equal situation. You're asking me to give something up. And this guy's coming in and saying, you don't have to give any of that up.
Oh? Well,
so if he's saying that you don't have to give any of this up, that's appeal.
Okay. Yeah, that would be appealing, wouldn't it? Why give anything up? Why not keep everything?
Not only why give anything up, why giving anything up to those people?
Oh, definitely true. Yeah, right.
Who are those people? Well, he'll help define them. Could be Jews, could be Muslims,
could
be
change
blacks,
every minute.
Could be Democrats. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it could be non-believers because I'm a white evangelical. I mean, this whole construct fits a lot of different things where this is my group, and you're asking me to give things up to those other people who clearly are, in a secondary position. And, it isn't that I hate them, but I'm not giving this stuff up.
Yeah. No matter what it is, if it's something that we would ordinarily think of as important, or haircuts, which we ordinarily would think.
And so he goes on to say, this means that the act of behaviorally granting white supremacy legitimacy entails not just the suspension of reason, but a narcissistic suspension of reason. And awareness of this is key for really understanding the emotional proclivities of Trump's base. Okay, you can't evaluate white supremacy or Trump's base through the framework of a rational sense of self-interest. The what's the matter with Kansas stuff. We all know that.
Yeah, okay.
Because the foundations of white supremacist psychology are inherently irrational. And because white supremacy flows from an irrational narcissistic premise, you must evaluate the behavior associated with it while factoring in that it answers to a specific distortion of collective self that's attributable to its inherently narcissistic nature. And so you can see why Trump's attracted to it.
Yeah, right. It just explains Trump himself as well as his theory. Well, he doesn't have a theory, but whatever, you get it. The theory of how his scatterbrain crap works.
So with that in mind, I've seen this take offered multiple times. If Donald Trump just does the right thing, allows mass testing, gets resources to everybody, his approval rating would go up. Why can't he see it's that simple? Once again, that's a case of projecting a rational sense, self-interest onto a man and his base who are not only chiefly motivated by rational, or not chiefly motivated by rational considerations. They answer to a collective sense of self-interest that's irrational. You framed your question in ways that don't take into account delusion that's essential to white supremacy, narcissistic delusion that is at all times animated by maintaining the dominant racial status. And further, I think, the author says, a lot of well-meaning white people want to conceive of some level of threat to an individual's rational sense of self-interest that once felt, the psychology will collapse. And this ill-backed presumption is a parallel common mistake when it comes to when dealing with narcissists, presupposing the narcissism has limits. So one of the most important tips for dealing with a narcissist is to see them for who they really are, and I'd extend that to racists too. You need to accept this gestures broadly is exactly what they want, right? This is the rationale for not trying to convince the Trump base.
Oh, yeah.
They're not going to change. It's impossible. It's impossible. Don't try to convince white evangelicals that they really should take a broader look at what they consider to be pro.
That's easier to understand as like, well, you're delusional. Somehow we've gotten used to that.
As such, again, everything we talk about in terms of persuasion is not aimed at them. It's aimed at the 10% difference between those who think Trump is telling the truth and the 10% who think that, well, I know he's lying, but I was going to vote for him anyway. Yeah. That's who you're aiming persuasion at, not the first group.
Only the percentage that has self-doubt occasionally.
Yeah, the percentage who could see something's not quite right.
Might be wrong. Yeah, all right, well, that's rare.
How does a narcissist handle criticism of his or her handling of a crisis? They act like everything's fine. They ridicule your concern. They downplay the extent of the crisis. Should evidence of a crisis prove impossible to conceal, the tactics shift to blaming other people. If you make a rational suggestion about what he or she could do better, they aren't not receptive to it. They perceive your irrational suggestion as an attempt to indict his or her abilities and is fixated on possible loss of status that may result from that indictment. That's why Trump can never do the right thing. Well, that's why all of these daily press conferences were not intended to give information to the public. And that's why, treating them as such by the media is just completely ridiculous.
Yes. Well, that takes some getting used to. We have a real problem in this country. And who could blame us for having this problem? Hey, why is my music not coming on? That's a good question.
It should. It's about to. But this is the end of this tweet storm here. This is why his worst supporters want Dr. Fauci gone. That's why they're protesting. That's why they want to reopen everything. They see every stepping stone to restructuring society as a slippery slope because they have to give up something. And if they give up something, they have to give up more. What they might give up is their status. And that's the bottom line.
All right. Well, yeah. If it's not rational, it's hard to deal with. Thank you, Greg. We got to take our break. We'll be back after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're in a different and odd place in the music because everything was kind of screwed up. My computer went to sleep as we were, I was enthralled in letting Greg run the show, so it was very nice and relaxing. And the show computer went to sleep, and so it took longer than needed to in order to get the thing up and running so I could hit the buttons, and you know how it went. It's not automatic. I still have to do those things. Anyway, there's still an awful lot left in that thread, but it's good. Certainly we'll pass that on. I mean, there's no way we're going to cram all. Is it literally 100? It is 101, as a matter of fact, tweets in this thread, and there's an awful lot to it. But there's a lot in the mix there. It's a difficult combination to try to crack and break through, which is, I guess, why you really can't do it. But breaking through non-rational, racist narcissism is like, how are you going to? That is a tough nut to crack. I don't see it happening anytime soon. So, and it's an interesting way. I mean, I knew all of those things were at play. We keep saying so, but it's difficult to. I don't know. Sometimes it's difficult to sit down and get your head around the enormity of the problem. But good job here by who are we even reading? Let's go back to the top. Ethan Gray. Okay, so very interesting. And who is Ethan Gray? What is hamburger? Chopped ham? No, it's chopped steak. It's Ethan Gray. I'll have to go to his Twitter bio. Who are we talking about here? Does he give any? Does he have any credentials that he decides to present to us? No, but he is following us on Twitter, so that's good news. Yeah, I don't know. Does he have a background in this? Is he just an extraordinarily good writer? Does he explain what himself better than most? Is that the only reason we're following along? I don't know. I can't tell. It's not supposed to be important to us. So we'll just evaluate what he had to share with us on its face and say that was well worth the time. There was another thing that Greg dropped on my lap here before I before I so rudely dismissed him from the show. You know how it is. At 10 o'clock, he turns into a pumpkin, and he's got to go. We'll be back on Wednesday, of course, and we'll follow up on some of this thing. But one more thing that he dropped on, I was not expecting this one, dropped in the Skype thread. What are we reading here? All right. Very impressive report, we are told, is the product of the Congressional Oversight Commission. And what even is that, one might ask. Let's see, in order to get it, you have to go to Toomey's, Pat Toomey's webpage, his Senate webpage, to get this report. This is the commission that we've heard about in mostly in passing, quite honestly. Reading stories about they were going to, I guess, oversee the pandemic response spending by the administration, and honestly, I'm a little surprised even to see anybody saying anything good about it, because one of the stories that's been circulating about it is, of course, that many, or there aren't a whole lot of them, but the membership of the committee has been put together as a bipartisan, bicameral joint committee, essentially. But I had read, and I think I even put away a story in Pocket, and I certainly retweeted something about it the other day. They've been frozen in place. It had been reported up until now by the lack of a chairperson for this committee. And so though there were people appointed to the committee who were supposed to be doing oversight work, without a chair, ordinarily these committees don't work very well. And in fact, there were some serious hurdles to their getting work done without a chair. I thought that was the latest reporting, because without a chair, as with most congressional committees, you couldn't approve the hiring of staff. You couldn't, approve your workflow to get things done. So though there would be members of the committee, and they may in fact be ready, willing, and able to get to work, the reality of it is that, without staffers and without spending authority, and I guess without, they're always going to be without subpoena authority, because that doesn't exist anymore. You just weren't going to get very much done. And so I was pretty sure that they wouldn't. That's what the reporting was saying, that they were just sort of frozen in place as a result. However, we do have, this report that Greg shares. Where is this? Where did I see this thing? I'll search it out here. But I'm pretty sure I had seen and made a comment on it, because the lack of a chair being nominated had been commented on. Here we are. This is, whose reporting is this? AP's chief congressional correspondent, Lisa Mascaro, attaching this article here, but noting 7 weeks after Congress unleashed more than $2 trillion to deal with the coronavirus crisis, an oversight commission intended to keep track of how the money is spent remains without a leader. And I was commenting on it as I scanned the article. They were saying, you can't hire staff, you can't really do any significant work, and that the situation was such that, each of the leaders of the various of the two houses had appointed their members, but they were supposed to get together and negotiate somehow a chair for this. And so that would mean, I guess, Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell getting together and agreeing on which person, senator, member of the House, Democrat, Republican, should chair this thing, and they were never going to be able to agree to it. And I was kind of shocked, like, why did we think that was going to work? Why is this not just Super Committee 2? And in fact, at least with respect to getting a chairperson in place, it has been. But apparently something's been done. Let me, I guess, start by filling in the blanks on the complaint side, and then we'll see what they came up with despite the complaints. With no leader, commission overseeing virus relief struggles. That, again, according to the AP. Matthew Daly is the author of this piece. It's just from yesterday. So 7 weeks after Congress unleashed more than $2 trillion deal, etc., right? An oversight commission intended to keep track of how the money is spent remains without a leader. 4 of the 5 members of the Congressional Oversight Commission have been appointed. So there's not a whole lot of them, 5, right? But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell have not agreed on a chair, leaving the commission rudderless as the federal government pumps unprecedented sums into the economy. Seems like a bad construction, quite honestly. And, you know, the Senate is going to insist that a senator be chair, and the House is going to insist that a House member be chair, and the Democrats will insist on a Democratic chair, and the Republicans will insist on a Republican chair. And maybe you'll get away with 2 co-chairs, but even so, you know, which one, will it be a Republican from the Senate and a Democrat from the House, and will they agree? I don't know. They haven't agreed so far. Without a leader, here's the process problem. Without a leader, the panel's remaining members can still do some oversight work, but cannot hire staff or set up office space. Of course, as it happens, they already have their own office space and their own staffs, and they can task those staff members to do this work, but it takes away from the operation of their offices. And I guess the fact is the product that we're pointed to by the tweet that Greg has sent us from Peter Conti Brown. I guess if I told you that, and I told you, okay, the members can have their own staffs do that work, you might very well then guess that it would be a Senate member that would produce the report. Why? Larger staff, more people at his disposal, to me, than anybody on the House side. The staffs are just smaller there, so it there's an greater opportunity cost for assigning a staffer to do this work. So more likely that a senator would come out with this work, which I guess we'll point to in a little bit. But first, more from the AP. Without a leader, you can still do some work, but you can't do staff or office space. Also more office space for the senators. The 4 members of the group have not met as a group since the economic rescue law was passed by Congress and signed by President Donald Trump in late March. Which also leads me to question, for instance, if they haven't met and a report comes out, but it's a report from Pat Toomey, does it reflect Democratic input at all? I don't know. Now I'm starting to get skeptical. Interesting. All right. The commission, if the commission is not functioning, which it is not, then there is no oversight on a huge part of the economic rescue law, said John Coates, professor of law and economics at Harvard Law School. So far, it's a oversight commission. Added Kimberly Wheely, depending on how you pronounce Whehle. I think we've had that name on the show. It might be the same person. A visiting professor at American University Law School. Lawmakers trying to oversee the spending are surging down the rapids without a raft, she said, which you can do, but it is dangerous. Congress created the panel to watch over $500 billion in lending to distressed industries and anybody who with a pen, essentially, backed by the Treasury Department and Federal Reserve. The Fed has said the money can be leveraged to offer more than $2 trillion in loans to U.S. companies, but without a chairman or chairperson, for instance, the panel's activity has been reduced to tweets and letters by individual commissioners and a May 8th statement in which it pledged to publish a required report, quote, soon. So I guess that report's been published and Pat Toomey took care of it. The failure by Pelosi and McConnell to agree on an oversight head is the latest example of a broken Congress. Marked by partisanship and polarization, Even as both sides acknowledge the importance of overseeing the sprawling economic rescue law, lawmakers are immobilized by a larger political fight with no resolution immediately in sight. I don't know if the whole Congress is broken, but I have my suspicions about parts of it. It's disappointing but not surprising that the Oversight panel lacks a leader nearly 2 months after the emergency law was adopted, said Danielle Bryan, director of the Project on Government Oversight. We've all seen how Congress operates, she added, saying it was difficult to see Pelosi and McConnell agreeing on an appointee in the near term, given their level of mutual distrust. Yes. The dispute between the two leaders far transcends this particular problem, Bryan said, but Oversight should not suffer because these two can't agree. Representatives for Pelosi and McConnell said they had no update on when the oversight position would be filled, although Pelosi has told reporters she and McConnell had been talking and hopefully will have a decision soon. Meanwhile, they have engaged in a high-profile war of words over a new $3 trillion rescue law pushed by House Democrats. McConnell called the bill an 1,800-page liberal wish list, while Pelosi lambasted McConnell and other Republicans who have said they want to hold off on more relief spending. Do you want to hear what she has to say? I mean, is it really a lambasting here? It's amazing to me how much patience and how much tolerance someone can have for the pain of others, she said. The House approved the bill on Friday, setting up negotiations with the White House and Senate Republicans that could go on for weeks. I mean, let me skip down a little bit here. More complaints about how Congress used to work together from Wheelie. Ironically, the economic rescue law itself was a rare exception, as Republicans and Democrats joined together to pass the bill overwhelmingly as the country faced an economic collapse. Let's see. Let me jump down here. Trump has bristled at the law's oversight provisions. No surprise there, suggesting in a signing statement, did we know about this, that some of the mandates from Congress were unconstitutional and did not need to be obeyed. I mean, I wonder which ones it is or whether you get specific in the signing statement. It's linked there. But to move on, Representative French Hill of Arkansas, Republican of Arkansas, one of the Oversight panel's 4 members, that says he urged Pelosi and McConnell to find a consensus and select the chair. Wow, what a brave position. Here's Pat Toomey, I mentioned here. Toomey, also on the panel are Congresswoman Donna Shalala from Florida. We heard a lot about that when she had some issues with her disclosures, her financial disclosures come up. And let's see. Look at that. I guess you can come from outside the ranks of the members. There's also lawyer Bharat Ramamurthy. I hope I got that even close to right. A former Democratic Senate aide, rounding out the panel's membership. So Pat Toomey, Donna Shalala, this former Democratic Senate aide Bharat Ramamurthy, and French Hill of Arkansas. Wow. That is an interesting collection of people. Shalala said in a statement Friday that she has divested all of her individual stock holdings following criticism that she failed to disclose stock sales she made last year after her 2018 election to Congress. Her actions should eliminate, quote, this is a quote, eliminate any potential conflict of interest and reassure her constituents that her only focus in Congress is serving our community and our country, Shalala said. Well, I hope that works. That is pretty remarkable, I guess, all told. But all right, so how does any of this lead us to the production of a report? Let's see. Peter Conti Brown, who's that? An assistant professor at Wharton, which, oddly enough, was foolish enough to award a degree to Donald Trump, a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution as well, and he has this to say. A very impressive, he says, report from the Congressional Oversight Commission is here, and I don't know, shall we open it? I guess we'll follow the link. It goes to Toomey's website, but it might just be, I don't know whether he wrote it or whether he's just agreed to host it or what. Let's see. A report dated today, questions about the CARES Act's $500 billion emergency economic stabilization funds. The first report of the Congressional Oversight Commission, dated today, crediting the members, but I don't know whose work product it is. And it's a relatively long, well, it's not that long, 16 pages, but long for reading on a on a podcast. Let's see what Peter Conti Brown has to tweet about it. Why is it impressive? He says, here are some preliminary thoughts in praise of this report. And apparently there are 8 of them. The first is the existence of the report itself. The commission is not yet fully established because Leader McConnell and Speaker Pelosi have not yet named a commission chair. This should be a huge priority. Oversight in this case is not just oversight. It is oversight of congressional prerogatives in monetary, financial, and economic policy. We should hope to see institutional priorities asserted here, not just partisan ones. Okay. I'm sorry, I was reading it and I was distracted by the ringing cell phone in the background and thinking about how I should not let it distract me. And look what happened. Okay, it should be a huge priority, sure, of course. Oversight's, not just oversight of congressional prerogatives in monetary, financial, and economic policy. Okay, that's, not really much of a thought. But all right, even so, the 4 commissioners who have been named, here they are again. They have put out this first report and haven't waited for the chair to be named. This is very good. It's a nice thing that they did it, if they worked together on it. We just read that they haven't met, but I don't know whether they meant in person or what. That's interesting too. Okay. Glancing at the report, there is no news here. The data, you know what, I'm going to back up and grab this thing just for one more story to look at. Let's see. Even so, the 4 commissioners who've been named, they've put out this report. That's good. Glancing at the report, there is no news here. So impressive that there's no news, and yet it's impressive. The data is from public sources. It's a good summary of what has happened, but not much more. It's still impressive to me, though, for 2 reasons beyond that the commissioners are already up and running. First, the list of questions are terrific. Why were U.S. territories excluded from the municipal and state lending facility? Why did the agencies choose 85% and 95% purchase rates for the Main Street lending facility? Not sure what that means. About 50 of these questions, apparently all fantastic. Second, gloriously, there is no dissenting report. I doubt these 4 commissioners agree unanimously on much of political salience, but they wrote a single report aimed neither at humiliating the Fed nor defending it against all comers, but asking very good questions. Let's hope we very soon see a commission chair, staff, and even more detailed reports with more questions and eventually answers from here on out. Okay. Gosh. I mean, maybe the questions are good. I don't really know. I didn't get that first question, but maybe you need to have more specialized knowledge to know. There's an awful lot of them in different headings. There is also one thing missing from this report is any indication of who wrote it and whether or not the members of the commission agree. There is no dissenting report, but there is also no concurrence. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I know they're working under emergency conditions, and maybe they have no staff who is aware and has to tell them, well, I mean, maybe there's a transmission letter that went with it. It's not in this PDF that says enclosed, is the report of the commission. And although we have more work to do, and although we have some substantive disagreements, we're all for the good of the country putting our name on this report. There's nothing that indicates that anybody, including Pat Toomey, agrees with this report. And ordinarily there's a page that says that to prove the case for those of us who are skeptics and doubt everything. Let's see. I mean, I don't know if there's any reason to disagree with anything or to think that the transmission of the report doesn't stand for the agreement of all 4 members, but I am not sure. Let's see. There's an introduction piece here. Let me tell you about the headings in which they have questions and see if that helps at all. All right. Lots of footnotes. I can tell you that. All right. The initial report. This is the first report of the commission. In it does say we, review the actions that the Treasury and the Fed have taken to implement Subtitle A to date, including the design of lending programs and facilities, and outline preliminary questions based on those actions. The Treasury has not disbursed any of the $46 billion it can use to provide loans and loan guarantees to the airline industry and businesses critical to maintaining national security. The Treasury published procedures and minimum requirements for making those loans and loan guarantees, along with corresponding applications for those loans in March and April of 2020. So I'm not certain why those things haven't happened, and it sounds like they're critical of that. The Main Street Lending Program is discussed with lots of bullet points here. Municipal Liquidity Facility. I don't know. So where's the questions? I'll scroll down here. Preliminary questions. There's general questions like how will the Treasury and the Fed assess the success or failure of this program? It's an okay question. The agencies are supposed to use this program to stabilize the economy and help companies and municipalities with liquidity issues. How will the agencies attempt to achieve this goal while protecting taxpayer dollars? Those are general questions. There are 20 of them. Then program and facility specific questions on the Main Street Lending Program, on the secondary market corporate credit facility, the municipal lending facility, lots of specific questions on all these things. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't share there's no reason in my quick skim to share the optimism of Peter Conti Brown on that one. So I guess, I don't know whether Greg was looking for a valuation of that or not, but I would say they still have some pretty significant problems getting this commission working. It's nice that they decided to do some work without a committee chair, but I'll tell you this, the one part of the work that I would like to see them have done is a page explaining whose work this was and whether it represented a consensus of the four or just somebody who thought, well, if I put something out and put the name of the commission on there, I get to define the narrative of the commission's work, fairly or otherwise. So that's a big question for me. All right, let's see. The other thing that distracted my attention while I was reading this, this is very interesting. This is going to pose another problem for the reopening of the economy. I just did read something the other day, and I guess I have a long list of notes of things that I saw over the weekend and didn't grab because I didn't think it was going to be a major focus. But for instance, I saw one tweet about a caretaker of a hotel somewhere. I don't think it was an American hotel, but perhaps in Europe somewhere, who had been working very diligently in this abandoned Grand Hotel to maintain the facility, and filled his days with rather mundane maintenance tasks, the idea of which was to guarantee that there was minimal obstacles to reopening, or rather, when the economy reopened, it would minimize the amount of time between the official time you were allowed to reopen and when they could reopen because their property was physically in condition for occupancy. And it hinted at the idea of his walking around and testing 1,400 rooms worth of sink taps, going and checking the plumbing in every single room and various other things that they had to check in on in order to make sure that when the economy switch got flipped, they were ready to go. By contrast, I happen to see here someone tweeting out this story. Is it a thread that will tell me where this comes from? I guess not. But just sort of tweeting out a picture. I guess maybe they went back to work to see whether they were ready to open. Says, so the mall, and I don't know what mall, the mall was shut down for 2.5 months because you know how things went with coronavirus. And they turned the AC off during that time. You know, why run it and spend money on that, right? Well, coming back, there's taking pictures in the leather shop here was some nice once nice looking shoes and handbags, etc. Says the mall had the AC off for 2.5 months and everything has mold on it. And I mean, it is covered. These products are ruined. And it's kind of amazing. It was the El Stash, E-L, like L, as in Spanish. Stash as in the end of mustache, I guess. STACHE is our tweeter here. And like I said, I don't know where this is. I don't know whether it's Florida. I don't know, where. That's the sort of place that's susceptible to this kind of thing, I guess. But yeah, logistics and process are always fascinating to me, not just legislative process. But yeah, you can't just say, all right, the economy's back on now. There are going to be malls full of stores, store after store after store after store. They're going to come back and find out that their inventory is ruined. Or even if the inventory isn't visibly ruined, like this is immediately obvious on these services. But mold, what if mold just starts getting all the workers sick with a whole new round of contagions that make everything all that much worse? It's just sort of one of those fascinating things we haven't considered up until now, and maybe the economy doesn't come back to life all that quickly just because they say so, and maybe we have to bail people out for ruined inventory. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Didn't intend to spend this much time on this one either, but as it turns out, anyway, the report goes on, or the tweet thread goes on, Sawgrass Mall, mind you. Our tweeter says that, I guess. I'm coming up with a Sawgrass Mills Mall in Sunrise, Florida. Florida, like I said, probably one of those places that would have that problem when the AC is turned off. And I see here among the top stories in Google, Sawgrass Mills Mall to reopen. That was published just 16 hours ago, so I guess that's, let's see, Broward's Sawgrass Mills Mall to reopen Monday amid pandemic. But I wonder if there's any mention of the inventory having been ruined. Masks will be offered, while signs will encourage shoppers to keep at least 6 feet apart from one another, but no word on whether they'll be encouraged to keep 6 feet away from the ruined inventory. And that'll be interesting. I would love to get down there and talk to people. Not really. I mean, I would like somebody else to go down there and talk to people and bring a camera. And I bet at the entrance you'd be passing out masks, and you know how it is. People there, people who would be going on day one of a reopening of a mall like that, likely to be the types that would refuse the masks. I'm not going to wear one of those. I'm an American and I'm a free man and you can't make... Anyway, so then they'd go in and they'll say, at last I can finally shop. And they'll go into the stores and they'll see mold all over everything, and mold all over the merchandise and who knows wherever else, the walls, I don't know where else it's collecting. And I wonder if here's my question, do they turn around and run back to the entrance and ask, you know what, I'll take one of those masks after all, because this whole place is filled with mold. But I guess, I don't know. They got some video in this thing, but I think it's of other places, nearby restaurants and things, which were open but only serving takeout. And so I think they probably had their mold problem taken care of. I find that fascinating, and a part of the logistics game that you didn't see in, you might not have seen it coming, I guess. And maybe not all the stores are as affected, and maybe it's unique to the leather goods. I really have no idea. But I'm sure that somebody thought, oh, the mall's closing. Turn off the air conditioning. Why pay to air condition a closed mall, right? We'll save money. It's the smart thing to do. And you imagine if somebody had said, no, you got to run the air conditioning while we're closed regardless, because they'd cut them off. Oh, all you liberals always trying to waste money on everything, right? And so anyway, pretty soon I'm sure we'll be bailing out leather shops for their ruined inventories in damp southern states across the country. I don't know, another one of those unconsidered? Is that even a word? One of those, what? Unanticipated. Thank you. There we go. It was unanticipated that she would be here to yell that out to me. Unanticipated consequences and unplanned for by logistics people because, this is probably an unprecedented situation. All right. Let's see. What else did I want to grab up here? Why was I back in the archives? I know it was, I was looking back when Greg was talking about the Italians working in Sweden, and I remembered, didn't we read something? It was a different Italian, and they were working in Denmark, the one we had read about on Friday, not in Sweden. Okay, let's see. We should probably update this story as well. I noticed Aaron Blake tweeting about this earlier, but just to clear things up, one of the things that happened over the weekend on Friday, another inspector general fired by Trump. And then I saw some pushback. He hasn't been fired. What is happening here is Trump has to give 30 days notice to Congress of his intention to fire an inspector general, and the Congress can still intervene. Well, guess what? That guy's fired. Congress is probably not going to intervene. I'm sure they'll, hold some kind of hearing and they'll hem and haw. And they might even insist, no, he's not fired. And then Trump will say, yes, he is. And they'll arrest him if he tries to come back to work. And then Congress will say, well, you know what we can do about that? Nothing, because Republicans, blah, 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 the Senate. We have no tools here. He's fired. But Aaron Blake noting Trump has replaced 5 inspectors general in the last 6 weeks, including 4 of them on Friday nights. So right at news dump time. 3 of them carried obvious political motivations. 2 others had been named to the Coronavirus Oversight Committee. Interesting. Although probably a different committee because there's only 4 slots on the one we just read about. But okay. The latest one was dismissed from the State Department, and allegedly he was in the middle of investigating Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for using political staff at the State Department to do personal errands for him. And apparently that included walking his dog, picking up his dry cleaning, and cooking dinner for him and his wife. A very unique circumstance, I'm sure. Except it wasn't unique to Mike Pompeo. Apparently, when he used to be over at the CIA, the Inspector General overseeing the CIA, I guess the IC Inspector General, who was in the news some time ago during the impeachment trial because of all the information they had about Ukraine. But the IC, Intelligence Community Inspector General, was already investigating Pompeo for exactly the same infraction when he was at CIA. So apparently this is a habit for him. Okay. So let's see. Washington Post writing on this, Aaron Blake himself, as a matter of fact, under the headline, Trump's slow-motion Friday night massacre of inspectors general. And let's see. The Friday news dump, also known as the Friday night news dump, is a political trick with plenty of precedent. Wait until the vast majority of the news business clocks out for the week and announce something you'd rather they not cover as much. People won't be reading as much news at that point anyway, and perhaps it'll be dismissed as old news by Monday morning, which we almost did, right? Few are as blatant about using this tactic, though, as the Trump White House. News broke late Friday night that Trump had removed the Inspector General for the State Department, Steve Linick. It's the third time in 6 weeks that such a move has been announced on a Friday night, with each Inspector General having done something to pretty obviously alienate Trump. The unprecedented spate of removals has reinforced how Trump is rather obviously seeking to undermine independent oversight of his administration, and the timing of each of them only reinforces that. Trump has also, over the last month plus, replaced a pair of acting inspectors general with oversight of the coronavirus response, with the latest being the acting Transportation Department Inspector General on Friday night. Though those carry less apparent whiffs of political motivation, their roles on the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee make the timing notable. Let's run through each of the 5 dismissals, and let's do it quickly, shall we? State Department Inspector General Steve Linick, the action, fired when he was removed, according to first reports, Friday, May 15th, about 10 p.m. What he did: issued a report in August of 2019 that alleges that leaders in the State Department had mistreated and harassed staffers and accused them of disloyalty to Trump. Gave the House's impeachment inquiry into Trump documents detailing Ukraine disinformation, and was allegedly investigating the misuse of a political appointee at the department to perform personal tasks for Pompeo and Mrs. Pompeo, according to a Democratic aide. What Trump has said? Retweeted this tweet suggesting Linick should have come forward earlier if he had such information about Ukraine. And it is reliably funneled through Byron York, tweeting, "So, State Department Inspector General asks for urgent briefing on Capitol Hill, Trump and Ukraine, then admits he had urgent material since May." This was back in October of 2013. After seeing it, Dem lawmaker declares completely irrelevant, says Byron York in his analysis of a CNN article that may or may not actually say that. So, who's Linick replaced with? Stephen J. Akard, A-K-A-R-D, former Foreign Service officer and former aide to Vice President Pence, dating back to his days in Indiana. So that should go well. Who else has been dismissed like this? Acting Health and Human Services Inspector General Christy Grimm. She was removed in favor of a permanent replacement, which, okay, that's what you're supposed to be doing. When did it happen? Shortly after 8 p.m., Friday, May 1st. What did she do? She issued an April report finding severe shortages of coronavirus testing kits, delays in results, and widespread shortages of equipment like masks. What has Trump said? Of her report, Trump said on April 6th, "It's just wrong. Did I hear the word Inspector General? Really? It's wrong. And they'll talk to you about it. It's wrong." What does that even mean? That was word salad. He added on Twitter the next day, "Why didn't the IG who spent 8 years with the Obama administration, did she report on the failed H1N1 swine flu debacle where 17,000 people died?" Remember, that was only 12,000 people. It wasn't a debacle, and he's headed for 100,000. Did she want to talk to the admirals? Why didn't the IG talk to the admirals, generals, VP, and others in charge before doing her report? Another fake dossier. Replaced with Assistant U.S. Attorney Jason Weida, W-E-I-D-A. Who else? Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson. We mentioned him. He's fired April 3rd around 10 p.m. What did he do? He forwarded the Ukraine whistleblower complaint to Congress after finding it to be credible and urgent. The complaint, which was overwhelmingly confirmed by impeachment witnesses, led to Trump's impeachment. What did Trump say? What else do you want to know? He said he hates that guy's guts. Who else? Acting Defense Department Inspector General Glenn Fine, removed in favor of a permanent replacement on Tuesday, April 7th. That's a Tuesday. What did he do? Or what he was set to do was oversee the Trump administration's handling of the new $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package, which was signed into law a week and a half earlier. What did Trump say about that guy? "We have a lot of IGs in from the Obama era," he said. And as you know, it's a presidential decision. So, okay, he was an Obama holdover, as, IGs are supposed to be nonpartisan, so it's going to happen from time to time. So he got rid of him just for that. Acting Transportation Department Inspector General Mitch Boehm, B-E-H-M, replaced also by a new acting Inspector General. So acting replaced with an acting. When? Friday night, May 15th. Why? Boehm has been tapped to serve as a member of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. As of Monday morning, he still appeared to be as a member of the committee, albeit with his old title of Acting Inspector General listed. What committee is this even? I'm going to click through and take a look. The Pandemic Response Accountability Committee exists where? I don't know. The leadership, Michael Horowitz, acting chair. He's the DOJ Inspector General. Yeah, okay, so it's all the Inspector Generals. Paul Martin, the vice chair, is the IG for NASA. Mitchell Boehm, there he is, right? Mark Bialik, IG for the Fed. Sandra Bruce, IG for Department of Education. Kathy Buller, B-U-L-L-E-R, IG for the Peace Corps. These are some core folks here. Let's see, the Homeland Security IG, Joseph Kufari. Scott Dahl, IG for Department of Labor. Ray Oliver Davis, IG for HUD. Yeah, so, basically all the department IGs. There's Christy Grimm, whose name came up earlier. So, okay. Terrific. No, it doesn't tell me too much. But okay, we understand why it's distinct from the Congressional Commission with a similar charge. But they will be doing it from the executive branch side. Let's see. So I think we got all the names on there. And it's interesting situation to keep an eye on. Some more troubling than others. Let's see. Other things to share. Oh, some quick stories and some longer stories. Let's see. Let me run down this one here, which we can do just with the headline, although it might be fun to read a little bit of this. News that was tweeted to me this morning from Rebecca Romans, our Lamb's End Beds friend, who sent me this story along with the womp womp notation, and I think quite rightly so. The title of the piece in the Washington Post: Judge denies pharma bro Martin Shkreli's delusional request to leave prison to fight coronavirus. Very interesting, but it's a hot thing now, letting people out of prison to get away from coronavirus. But he was going to go home and cure it, was what he said. Remember that? A judge this weekend denied convicted pharmaceutical executive Martin Shkreli's request to leave prison so he could research a treatment for the novel coronavirus after officials dismissed his rationale as the type of delusional, self-aggrandizing behavior that got him locked up. This sounds like it could be fun. Shkreli, you know all about him. In case you don't, he's the pharma bro executive who raised the price of an AIDS drug by 5,000%. Has been serving a 7-year sentence at a low-security prison in Allenwood, Pennsylvania since his 2017 conviction for defrauding investors. Known for taunting his critics, Shkreli has been banned from Twitter and denied bail over antics including a bounty on Hillary Clinton's hair. Yeah, not likely to be the guy who gets released. Prisoners nationwide have sought release during the coronavirus pandemic as correctional centers turn into hotspots for the virus, but Shkreli's request was unusual. He wanted to go to his lab to perform work, apparently. In a separate research proposal posted online, Shkreli, 37, in case you were wondering, said the pharmaceutical industry's efforts to create a treatment for COVID-19 are inadequate and that he is, quote, one of the few executives experienced in all aspects of drug development. In their review of Shkreli's request for a 3-month release under strict supervision, the probation department overseeing his case marveled at Shkreli's claim that he could find a COVID-19 cure that has, quote, so far eluded the best medical and scientific minds in the world working around the clock. It's that type of thinking that landed him in prison, the department said, according to U.S. District Judge Kiyo Matsumoto's 9-page ruling issued Saturday. The disgraced executive has repeatedly flouted authorities and seemed to revel in even a critical national spotlight. He famously smirked at a congressional hearing on drug price gouging and live streamed to supporters the day after his first arrest. In her denial of the furlough request, Matsumoto wrote that Shkreli was healthy, that he had no recent history of pre-existing medical conditions that placed him at higher risk, and that no cases of the virus have been reported at the prison. Defendant requests to be released into, among other places, an apartment in New York City, the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, Matsumoto wrote. Yeah, so I guess for his own safety, you could deny that request. Very interesting and worth sharing. I'm glad we got a chance to note that. Let's see. Other important news and a mix of important and not so important news. Let's see. Here is something that I thought perhaps we should see if we can clear things up or check back on my own work in reading through what was happening with Michael Flynn's case. The New York Times publishing on, I guess this would have been Friday, and I missed it. The Justice Department's attempt to drop the Michael Flynn case explained by Charlie Savage, who you always want to hear from, and Sharon Lafreniere, who I imagine I'll want to hear from now on, I guess, if she's working with Charlie Savage on this thing. Just not as familiar with her work yet. Let's see. The move is highly unusual and has promoted a judge to appoint an outsider to argue against the department. We got that much on the record. Let me see, though. Charlie Savage should have some interesting views on this. Judge Emmett Sullivan, who's presiding over the case against Michael Flynn, has appointed a former mafia prosecutor and retired federal judge John Gleeson, remember this, to argue against Attorney General William Barr's attempt to drop the case. The case against Flynn was developed by the FBI working on the Trump-Russia investigation, brought by the Office of the former Special Counsel, Mueller, of course, and is now being attacked by Barr as illegitimate. It has raised a complex stew of issues for Sullivan to sort through. First section here, what did Mr. Flynn plead guilty to doing? You know about that. He pled guilty to lying to the FBI about the nature of his calls with Russians during the transition period. Is Barr's attempt to drop the case unusual? Well, yes, highly unusual. Legal experts have struggled to identify any precedent for the Justice Department dropping such a case after obtaining a guilty plea. And more than 2,300 department veterans accused Barr in an open letter of subverting a justice system that's supposed to treat everyone equally. I would be astonished if the Department of Justice made these arguments in any other case in the country, said Nancy Gertner, a former federal judge who now teaches at Harvard Law School. This is the Flynn rule. What has Judge Sullivan asked Mr. Gleeson to do? Present arguments against the Justice Department's motion to drop the case. This week, Mr. Gleeson helped write an opinion article about Barr's intervention that argued that a court should not blindly approve an attempt by prosecutors to dismiss a well-founded prosecution for impermissible or corrupt reasons. Sullivan has also asked him to evaluate whether Flynn committed perjury and should be held in contempt of court. We heard that part on Friday, and it wasn't clear to me on Friday, and now it is, that he'll also argue about the dismissal of the charges and whether it's proper and permissible. There have been some complaints that perhaps he has shown prior bias by writing this opinion article saying, yeah, I think that you should not. But as has also been pointed out, when you are permitting filing of briefs from amici, friends of the court, right? You don't look for, you wouldn't go out searching for unbiased people to write. They're petitioning to be amici, to file amici briefs because they're interested. That's why their arguments are of interest. And zealous advocacy from both sides kind of has to be presented if you're going to get to a fair decision. So, not unusual in that sense. How might Mr. Flynn have committed perjury? Well, I imagine by pleading guilty in court and then saying, I want to take that back, right? Flynn had said under oath multiple times and signed a statement under penalty of perjury, there you go, that he knowingly lied to the FBI agents. So now he says he didn't do that. So penalty of perjury, right? Here's the penalty. I mean, that really kind of sums it up. What would it mean if the judge found Mr. Flynn in contempt? This is fairly straightforward. Contempt of court can be a crime under the federal rule of criminal procedure. Federal judges, without the involvement of the Justice Department prosecutors, may fine or imprison people who misbehave in court in a way that impedes the administration of justice. Judge Sullivan appears to be contemplating deeming Flynn's contradictory statements to him while under oath as such misconduct. That would be highly unusual, some legal experts said, but probably in his discretion, except when it gets to the Supreme Court, when they say, oh, we want Trump to win. What is Mr. Barr's argument for dropping the case? The Justice Department claims that there was no legitimate investigation to justify the FBI's interview of Mr. Flynn, so his lies, if they were lies, were not material ones and thus did not constitute a crime. In support of that argument, the department has pointed to the fact that before the issue of his phone calls with the Russian ambassador arose and agents questioned him, the FBI had decided to close a counterintelligence inquiry into Mr. Flynn because investigators had found no evidence that he was conspiring with the Russians. which is interesting because even before they knew he was talking to the Russians, he had already been under suspicion of being a spy and collaborating with Russia, which is a bad thing if you are a longtime Pentagon general and B, headed to the job of national security advisor. You know, the guy's a spy and has been since forever. He's been under suspicion that way since, 2014, when he got his ass kicked out of the Pentagon because he was violating all the counterintelligence protocols. The FBI had not completed the bureaucratic process of closing the inquiry, however. Essentially, the accusation is that the investigation into Flynn was no longer valid, but the Bureau used it as a pretext to interview him, rendering his lies to the agents irrelevant. That is nonsense. Why is that theory disputed? First, because even if the investigation into Flynn had been closed out, his phone calls with the Russian ambassador and his unexplained pattern of lying about them to the White House colleagues, including Vice President Mike Pence, was new information that the FBI could arguably have cited to reopen it and investigate him further. More broadly, Crossfire Hurricane, the FBI's overarching counterintelligence investigation into Russia's covert efforts to help Trump win the election, and the nature of any ties to his campaign, was still active and arguably provided an independent basis to question him. Do protocol irregularities around the interview matter? Probably not legally, but they make James Comey, then FBI director, look bad, which is why they're bringing it up. Comey unilaterally dispatched agents to question Flynn in the middle of unresolved deliberations with the acting attorney general, Sally Yates, about whether they should instead first notify the White House, according to FBI files. The move angered Yates and other department officials. Comey's not a good guy in all this. Comey also later acknowledged that the fact that agents did not go through White House lawyers to speak to Flynn was something I probably wouldn't have done or gotten away with in a more organized administration, but as a legal matter, a deviation from normal bureaucratic etiquette does not get defendants off the hook, criminal law experts said. Yeah, that rarely happens. True. But Comey is all over the map in screwing with regulations. For a by-the-book guy, he really deviated too often from the book, both in his handling of the Hillary Clinton investigation and this one. Did the FBI set out to see whether Flynn would lie? Another big claim from the Trump administration. There are reasons to believe agents did so, raising the question of whether that would be an abuse, as Flynn's supporters maintain, or normal investigative steps. In handwritten notes before a brainstorming session about how to question Flynn, William Priestap, the FBI's counterintelligence chief at the time, wrote, "What's our goal? Truth/admission, or get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired." An FBI official setting up the meeting discouraged Flynn from involving White House lawyers, and the agents did not remind Mr. Flynn it would be a crime to lie to them before asking about the calls. Oh no. Flynn's defense lawyers accused the FBI of setting up her client. Barr has declared that the investigators were trying to lay a perjury trap, but many legal experts said the FBI complied with the rules surrounding voluntary interviews and treated Flynn no differently than they do many investigative subjects. Former law enforcement officials said it's standard for the FBI to approach someone who has been telling lies relevant to an investigation to see what they'll say. Hundreds of people every year are charged and convicted of lying to federal authorities, and in the courtroom, entrapment defenses rarely work. Ronald Sullivan Jr., a former federal defense lawyer who teaches criminal law at Harvard Law School, said that he objected to the way the FBI treated criminal suspects, but if Flynn's case was tossed out on that basis, legions of other cases should be too. The FBI did what the FBI normally does, he said. General Flynn is getting a form of special justice that's repugnant to the very foundation on which our justice system rests. Oh, well, I hope that doesn't happen. Did the Justice Department wrongly withhold evidence from Mr. Flynn? This, he says, is an open question, and we'll have to review that perhaps tomorrow if we continue with this, or you can review it on your own. Other questions asking this: what is the government asking for? Didn't an Obama-era general get off too? Apparently, reference to the presidential pardon of a retired Marine Corps General James E. Cartwright, if you recall that case. And if not, well, you can review it here. We just don't have the time to bring you the full story on that one. Too bad. We'll have to leave it there. I hate having to do that. But there are so many other stories we didn't get to. Luckily, it's only Monday. We're going to be happy about that because we have the rest of the week to share these other stories with you, and there's lots of them. And unfortunately, that will probably take us into the swamps of the so-called Obamagate thing that Trump is making up. But luckily, we have lots of reporting dragging that stupid theory through the mud as well. All right, so I said we'd have to leave it, but that doesn't mean that we leave you, because there's more to come here on Netroots Radio. Of course, I'm speaking of Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here. If you just keep your radio or computer or whatever you're using tuned, here's what he's got coming up. Let's see. As Trump forces the nation to reopen, evidence suggests large crowds in enclosed spaces is what it takes to spread the virus. Oh, we hate evidence. Then, on the rest of his menu for the day, a women's health advocacy group purchased an Alabama abortion clinic to keep it from closing. Interesting tactic. Trump's firing of the State Department's IG could be unlawful if it was intended to retaliate against one of his investigators. And racism spread the virus in Oregon. We'll find out about how, along with some other things, right after this. And we've got some more on the international front, as usual, in the last half of the show. I'll tell you about it after
Daily
this.
Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, ready? Nigeria impounded a British plane for breaking its coronavirus flight ban rules. And using the pandemic as cover, Albanian authorities began demolishing the national theater after dragging away dozens of actors and activists at gunpoint. Never a fun thing to see in Albania. We'll be back tomorrow.